The movie begins in a world where time travel has not been invented yet, but 30 years from now it will be, and criminals will use it in secret. They send targets back in time to specialized assassins called loopers. The body vanishes from the future, clean and untraceable. A young looper named Joe works this job without hesitation. He meets his friend Seth, who shows off a new hoverbike. Seth jokes about attracting women with a small genetic mutation called TK. About 10% of people can float small objects with their minds. Everyone hoped for superheroes, but floating quarters is all it offers. Another looper named Zach has just closed his loop, and everyone celebrates. Closing a loop means killing your own older self when he is sent back. The employers erase all traces of the looper's existence this way. The looper gets a golden payday and 30 years of freedom before his turn. But this job does not attract the most forward-thinking people, and Joe is no exception. The club celebrates Zach's golden payout, but this tradition will soon threaten Joe directly. Seth bursts into Joe's apartment in a state of sheer panic. He demands Joe's gun and begs for protection from enforcers. Joe realizes what happened and asks Seth what he did. Seth explains his older self was sent back humming a familiar tune. The song triggered deep memories of Seth's mother caring for him in a dark room. His older self told him about a new boss in the future called the Rainmaker. This Rainmaker is closing all the loops, and Seth's older self ran. Seth let his loop run, and now the enforcers are hunting him down. He begs Joe for help as his only friend in the world, but Joe's loyalty has a price. Joe gives him money and tells him to flee on a freight train. But the Gat men arrive at Joe's door before Seth can even leave. An enforcer named Kid Blue pushes his way inside aggressively. Joe stalls them while a watcher guards the apartment outside. Joe goes to meet Abe, who runs the entire city from the future. Abe was sent back by the mob to manage the loopers with armed Gat men. He mocks Joe's old-fashioned clothes and tells him to do something new. Abe tells Joe he knows Seth paid him a visit last night. Abe reminds Joe he rescued him as a kid and gave him this life. He says he saw the bad version of Joe's life and changed its course. Abe asks Joe to give up Seth or surrender half his hidden silver stash. Joe has been secretly saving silver bars for years to escape to France. Abe gives him a choice: his only friend or his entire future savings. Joe asks if they will end Seth, but Abe says they will not. A man from the future who runs free damages the timeline severely. Joe gives up the floor safe code, choosing his silver over his friend, but this choice will haunt him. Abe tells Joe to rest and take some time to recover from the ordeal. The enforcers capture Seth and begin cutting pieces from his body. They do this to send a message through time to the older Seth. He cannot even remember his mother's face, only the feeling of her hands. He visits a woman named Susie and offers her half his silver for her child, but Susie refuses, saying silver always comes with strings attached. Joe refocuses on his plan to save enough and leave for France. Then one day Joe's own assignment appears on the ground in the field. He prepares to close the loop and collect his golden payday like everyone else. The older man turns and knocks Joe down before he can fire. Old Joe escapes into the city, and the word Rainmaker echoes through everything. Young Joe chases, but loses his older self in the busy streets. Old Joe steals a coat and disappears into the crowd. Kid Blue failed to prevent the escape, and Abe is furious about it. This is the second loop to run in a single week, and the pattern is spreading. Every second that passes with Old Joe free makes the timeline worse. Kid Blue vows to fix his mistake and capture the escaped looper himself. Both versions of Joe are now hunted by Abe's men, but only one knows why he ran. Old Joe goes to a diner, and young Joe tracks him there. They sit across from each other with weapons hidden. Old Joe notices the waitress and remembers something from his past. Young Joe says his French is coming along for his planned escape abroad. Old Joe knows young Joe has a gun hidden between his legs. Young Joe says he earned this life and demands the older man step aside. But Old Joe says he cannot let young Joe walk away from this diner. Staring into his own younger eyes is strange and disorienting for both of them. His memories are cloudy because they are just possible futures, not fixed events. When young Joe does something, Old Joe remembers it clearly and it physically hurts. Even apart, whatever young Joe does, the older man feels the consequence. Old Joe knows two things for certain about what is coming for young Joe. He knows what is happening in his head, and he knows young Joe will meet a woman. She will save his life and clean him up from his destructive path. But remember her. Old Joe calls young Joe a killer and a junkie with a child's mentality. He says the woman will take his love like a sponge and heal him. Young Joe will think he is finally safe from the past and clear of everything. But 30 years from now, something terrible happens to this woman. Old Joe says he will tell young Joe exactly what happens to her. But the answer is not here yet. He asks if young Joe has heard of the Rainmaker, the name Seth mentioned before. Legend says he took control of all 5 syndicates alone in just 6 months. He started closing every looper's loop, and no one even has a picture of him. Stories say he has a synthetic jaw and saw his mother wounded as a child. Old Joe has a number from hospital records that identifies the Rainmaker as a child today. The child exists right now in this county, and Old Joe will find him first. Young Joe says none of this concerns him and demands to see the woman's picture. But Old Joe refuses to give her up, and the diner is suddenly surrounded by Gat men. Both Joes flee through the back as armed men close in from every side. A massive chase erupts through the streets and into the open fields. Kid Blue and the Gat men fire as the 2 Joes run in opposite directions. Young Joe manages to escape on a motorcycle, but loses Old Joe completely. The house belongs to a woman named Sarah, with a young son named Sid. Sarah fiercely protects her land and threatens any drifter who wanders near. Kid Blue had tracked Seth earlier and is still hunting Joe across the county. Abe takes Kid Blue's weapon and warns him not to mess up again. Kid Blue begs for one more chance to capture the escaped looper alive. Abe refuses and tells him to let the grown-ups handle the situation. Sarah spots him and threatens him with her shotgun without hesitation. Joe collapses from withdrawal, and his body begins shutting down. He cannot feel his legs and begs for water as the craving takes hold. Sarah takes him in so he will not die on her property, but she is not kind about it. Her son Sid watches from a distance, curious about the stranger on the ground. Sarah tells Sid the man is just sick and will leave soon, but Joe will not leave. Joe drifts in and out of consciousness, haunted by memories of a woman's face. He keeps repeating the first time he saw her face like a broken record. The words echo through his feverish mind, like a warning he cannot yet understand. Morning comes and Sarah tells Joe to rest, then get off her farm. She cleans a gun, while reminding him he has until the end of the week. Sarah aims her shotgun and demands he get off her land immediately. Joe says he is not afraid, so she describes the gun's devastating power. He tells her he is no threat to her or her boy and just needs the fields. He will stay out of sight, but he needs to verify her house on a map. Sarah sees the number on the map and recognizes it immediately. She threatens Joe with rock salt and demands to know who he really is. He cannot return to the city because Abe's men search for him around the clock. Old Joe had 3 houses marked on his map, and Sarah's is one of them. Sarah realizes the older man is coming to murder her son, and her fear is justified. Joe explains Old Joe thinks killing the Rainmaker will send him home to his wife. Sarah reveals the numbers are Sid's birthday and the hospital where he was born. 3 children were born that day, and Old Joe does not know which is the Rainmaker. She asks if she can trust Joe to protect them when the moment comes. Joe says he does not care about trust or her son, only getting his own life back. He says Old Joe will come to this house last, delaying the confrontation between them. Joe suggests burning the cane fields for better visibility, but Sarah refuses. She will not destroy her crop and sets strict ground rules instead. Sarah tells Sid to stay away from the strange man on the farm. Sid is curious but agrees to stick with his mother, though his curiosity will win. Sid sneaks out to help Joe build a stronger communication device. Joe tells him they need a bigger battery to boost the signal further. Sid asks Joe directly if he ends people for a living, and Joe does not deny it. Sid says he wants a gun to stop bad things from happening, but his power is beyond guns. Sarah watches him carefully, still unsure whether he is a danger or a protector. Then one afternoon Sid gets frightened by a noise outside, and something terrifying happens. His fear triggers a massive surge of telekinetic power that shakes the entire room. Objects fly through the air with violent force as Sid screams in panic. Sarah calms him down, but Joe has seen the truth about this child. Sid's power is far beyond floating quarters, and it is fueled by fear and rage. Sid's real mother left, and the boy fears Sarah will abandon him too one day. Joe begins to see what his life could be, if he chose something besides silver. Sarah runs her hands through his hair, and he remembers his mother's touch at last. Meanwhile, old Joe reaches the first house on his map and confronts a child there. He realizes it is the wrong child and moves on to the second house. He finds another wrong child, and the weight of his mission presses harder on him. Kid Blue tracks young Joe to the farm and arrives with armed Gatmen. Joe fights them off and captures Kid Blue's weapon in the chaos. He drives the Gatmen away, but the farm's hidden location is now exposed. Sarah tends to Joe's wounds afterward, and they grow closer than ever before. Joe sees a future he never imagined, filled with love instead of violence and silver. He reaches the house and confronts Sarah, and Sid with his weapon raised. Sid sees the armed stranger and panics immediately at the sight of him. The boy's terror triggers his telekinetic power to surge out of control again. Old Joe raises his weapon toward the child, determined to end the Rainmaker before he rises. Sarah throws herself between the gun and her son, without a moment of hesitation. Joe watches from the field and suddenly sees the future unfold in his mind. The traumatized child grows up consumed by vengeance and becomes the Rainmaker. The cycle of violence creates the very monster old Joe is trying to prevent. Joe understands that the only way to break the cycle is to remove himself from it entirely. If young Joe dies, old Joe ceases to exist and never comes to this farm at all. Sarah will live, Sid will grow up loved, and the Rainmaker will never rise from pain. Joe makes his choice and turns his own weapon on himself. Sarah holds Sid close as the danger fades into the quiet fields around them. The future has changed because a mother's love saved the child. A broken man's sacrifice breaks the loop and ends the cycle forever.